And we're basically just saying this so that we could accommodate the speakers so they don't have to go sort of like far left, far right. And we're actually also going to take some photos so that, you know, it looks a little cozier. Merci bien.
All right, so this is the last DevTO and Girl Geeks Toronto of the year. Thank you all for coming out. We've got Anna here, Amy, sorry, not Anna. Amy here from Girl Geeks as well. Come on. And so welcome all to DevTO and Girl Geeks. Our sponsors tonight, Talent Minded and Densify, are also here, and we're gonna get a quick intro from them. Just a quick heads up, so the code of conduct is in effect today. So if you want to read the full code of conduct, this is where you can reach it. And basically, what we're saying here is just like we'll be nice to everybody and we won't get drunk. So thank you to Talent Minded and Densify as well as Wrangle. So we'll get Anna to Amy.
So one of our sponsors tonight is Talented Minded. And Talented Minded is the first subscription-based full-service talent acquisition solutions provider in Canada. They recruit all over the world. Sorry, this is terrible. All over the world, providing flexible, scalable, monthly managed services and programs to help you hire the right people and build diverse, talented pipelines for the future. So I'm going to introduce Kim Benedict, who is going to tell us a little bit more about Talented Minded.
Thank you. We're really happy to be here for two reasons. And the first reason is the topic really resonated with me. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Talent Minded. We've been in business for 4 years. And like Amy mentioned, we have a very different type of recruiting model. And we only work with companies that want to build great cultures and great companies. And we do that all over the world. But the topic really resonated with me because I was actually reminded about when I had my first child, or my only child, and he's 14 now, and I kind of had to jog my memory, but I remember when I came back from maternity leave, and I worked in a company in recruitment at the time, a very traditional type of staffing model, but it was mostly women. Right? It was run by mostly women. 80% of our workforce was mostly female. And I came back my very first day, and my office had changed, right? There was actually no chair for me to sit on. I had no setup, no pen, no paper. There was not a meeting for me to debrief me on everything that had changed over the last year. And I took every ounce of that mat leave because I was in labor for 33 hours. And so I remember thinking, like, is it like this for everybody, or are we just really bad at this? And subsequently, I actually left 4 months later. There was no career growth for me at all, and every client that I had nurtured and developed over the 10 years that I was with that organization was pretty much gone. So I had to start all over, and it's a really hard thing to do in a very traditional, like, staffing model. So the topic really resonated with me. And so secondly, we recruit for tech companies and CEOs and founders everywhere, all over the world, say they want to build diverse and inclusive. They want to hire more women in tech, women in sales, and yet they do everything the same as they've been doing it for 10 years or 2 years, or the same as every other company. And so by design, they don't do anything different. They don't change their policies, their programs, their crappy job ads, right? So we try to help companies with that. Nobody's perfect, and you can't have it all, but it's certainly something that we strive for. So in reading this playbook, there was so many ideas and so many things that we want to help companies implement. So earlier this year, we worked with a startup here in Toronto. And the founder came to me and said, we want to build a returnship program. Has anybody ever heard of a returnship? Kind of like an internship, but it's actually where you invite people to apply to positions where maybe they've taken a professional pause, whether it's for an ill family member or maternity leave or to stay at home with your children. And we're inviting women to apply to come and take contract work at this organization. And it was so interesting that Globe and Mail actually wrote an article about it. And then we realized that we built Talent Minded on returnships. We have tons of women who have kids and want to stay at home and be flexible but do meaningful work. So it was really awesome, and we were trying to inspire other companies and other tech companies in the community, in the ecosystem, to do the same. So it's a passion of ours. We're really happy to be here, happy to be a sponsor. Thanks for giving me like 1 minute extra. But thank you very much. And is this back to you? Back to you? Okay, thank you.
Next up, we got Jamie from Densify. I got your name right? Yes, okay.
I'll put this down. I'll try not to wave. I'll try not to wave the microphone around. Thank you, Jamie Davey from Densify. Just wanted to say, again, reiterate everything that Kim said. This is our first sponsorship with DevTO, first of many. I look forward to it. Densify does... not getting into the technical details of what we do, it's really optimization as code, and we've really taken our whole enterprise approach and brought it down to a grassroots level, doing infrastructure as code to the DevOps teams within organizations of all shapes and sizes. So the business side of it, that's great. When I looked at the agenda for tonight, because what really is happening is our development team is sponsoring this event. Most of them are at AWS reInvent this year. But when I looked at the event title, I noticed our organization is very diverse, both from a gender perspective and from race and culture. And I never pay attention to it because it's just, I'm in Toronto and that's just the norm here. But it's amazing seeing a lot of these events go on, because in a lot of cases I work with, I don't want to stereotype some American organizations, but I don't see that. And when I see that, companies and cultures like this and countries like Canada and Toronto lead the way, it makes me proud to be here and be a part of all this. So I'm looking forward to tonight's, the rest of the agenda. And if anyone's interested in anything that we do, I'm available, not tonight, another day. This is for a different event. This is for some better stuff. So thank you very much.
Last but not least, we got Beth from Wrangle, who's going to tell us about this piece.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Just a little bit about Wrangle. Wrangle is a digital transformation company. We build mobile and web apps, and we can plan, build, and design mobile web apps for innovative and worldwide companies like Aldo or Uniqlo and things like that. And that's basically it. But again, thank you so much for coming, and let's get into it.
Okay, so quick announcement. So we've got this discount for Spotlight React happening December 1st. With code DevTO, you'll save 30% on the tickets. So that's Spotlight React happening on December 1st. And last but not least, if you're interested in keeping in touch with this community, there's a TechMasters Slack channel, and that's techmasters.chat, and you can stay in touch with everyone here who's on there, and as well as everybody else in the community. And now we'll just get Anna and Amanda to present the Parenting Playbook. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So, thank you for coming. We're just going to start by giving you a little intro about who we are and why you should be listening to us and what we do. But just to get started, who's read the playbook? Show of hands. Yeah, a few people.
In the back.
Perfect. How many people here are parents? A couple of you. Perfect. Anybody considering being a parent? Anything like that? No?
Who wants to hire parents?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So just get started with a little bit about me. So my name's Anna Mackenzie. I'm What's Up Anna on Twitter, so feel free to follow me or tweet at me anytime. I'm active, as they say. So I'm the founder of the Expecting Playbook, which is a toolkit similar to the Parenting Playbook, but it's for when you're preparing to go on leave. So there's lots of tips and tricks in there, particularly for people who are thinking of being parents. And sometimes we might kind of touch on stuff that's in there, like a managerial plan. But tonight will be particularly about the Parenting Playbook, which is beyond the leave. It's when you come back to the workplace and what you can do as an individual and also what your company can do to make sure that there are parent-friendly policies in place. And I am not a parent, before anyone asks. Some people think I've been pregnant for 2 years. But I have a dog. His name is Maui. He's a rescue dog from Texas. And I love dogs and I like cookies. And I am accepting donations of either one. Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda, and that's my daughter, Fiona. She's 4. So I've got Fiona, who's 4, just started JK, and Everett, who is 2, and he isn't in JK. He's at home. And I'm the founder and CEO of The Workaround. And so The Workaround is a parent-friendly workspace at Danforth and Woodbine. So we're a co-working space with childcare, one of only 5 in North America. And I opened 6 weeks ago, and so it's been pretty good in the last little while. And so we've gotten some great coverage in BlogTO and all these other media outlets, including being named in Forbes and in our Globe and Mail op-ed from last week. So it's been a good stretch. I'm also the author of Day 9, which is a postpartum depression memoir with my daughter. I suffered severe postpartum depression, was institutionalized against my will for 18 days in a hospital, and then got out, went back to work for tech startups, took a company from 4 employees to 42, and then left that to start my own company. And so the book is really about resilience and how mental health is an illness like any other and can be recovered and conquered. And yeah, and Anna and I have worked together on the playbook, and what I love so much about what Anna said around not being a parent is there's 3 of us actually. There's also Nora, who we can flip to on the next slide. And we put together the playbook, and we're in 3 life stages. So we've got Anna, who is our non-parent advocate, as we put it together, and who wrote the playbook. And what's so important about Anna's work is when you approach your employer about maternity leave or paternity leave or questions of pregnancy, they assume that's because you're pregnant and about to leave. And so to have an advocate like Anna who can say, where's the pumping room? Or what is your maternity leave policy? And she's asking on behalf of all of us. It's so critically important to have an ally like her. And then we have Nora here, who is like 9.5 months pregnant and absolutely not willing to come out tonight, and all on to her. But we wanted to make sure that we did a shout out to her because she was our co-author on the playbook.
Yeah, and just one final acknowledgement. The little bears that you see are designed by Dre Croft. She's a designer at League. So just wanted to acknowledge her for her great work as well. And then we'll get into it. Yeah. So this is a high-level view of what we cover in the playbook. So we're just going to go over this quickly to give you an idea of what you would find if you did decide to read it. It reads really well, kind of like a children's book because of the really nice designs by Dre. But we start off by talking about how you become a parent-friendly workplace. And to some people, like, what does that mean to you? What do you think that
Parent-friendly.
Anyone? Yeah, that's usually the biggest one is flexibility. So what we cover is why you should be parent-friendly, how to become parent-friendly, what to do when someone comes back from leave. So very often, for those of you that work in startups, so I've worked in startups essentially for my whole career, a year in the startup land is like a light year, right? Employees are changing, things are changing. You go on leave, when you come back, you're coming back into a completely different situation, which means your employer should be re-onboarding you. So Kim, like what you were sharing, thank you so much for that. I want to acknowledge you for that as well. That's an amazing access point for you guys to see like what it would be like for someone who comes back into your company that's basically a different company. So you're really missing the support factor there when you don't offer some sort of return policy. So we do have a managerial plan that you find in the Expecting Playbook, but we explain why it's more important in the Parenting Playbook. Do you want to talk about childcare?
Yeah, childcare. So when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter 4 years ago, the first thing I did was get on a wait list for midwife, because that was the thing I wanted to do and had heard that there were long wait lists for that. And then about a year into my mat leave, someone said, right when I was about to return to work, like, what's your plan for your daughter? And I said, I'm going to start checking out some daycares. No idea that the wait lists are 2 years long. And thousands of dollars per month, so much so that I didn't believe it was true. I had to call up a bunch of daycares and be like, just tell me, like, what's it going to cost me? And then to find out that daycare in this city ranges from $1,700 to $2,200 per month per child knocked me off my ass. I couldn't believe it. And for somebody who's been told through my entire career to save for RESPs, like, save for RESPs so that your children can go to college one day in 20 years, but in fact you need more than a university amount of savings for a child when they're 1, means really we need to be talking about childcare far earlier than once we actually have our children. And so affordability is an absolute issue and crisis in the city, and the other is accessibility and just finding the spaces, if you can find the space, and then navigating the list. And what's so challenging that we noticed from talking to other startups, and when we talked to other startup leaders, was if you're working in an organization where those leaders don't have children, or they haven't had children in many years, so they haven't faced the childcare crisis lately, this just doesn't enter into their ecosystem of problems they're thinking about. And so then where's the support for that employee in navigating the childcare system and navigating those wait lists and finding out if there's subsidies available for them? And so a lot of the work for the playbook was, we just wanted to call out current state. Yeah. This is how much childcare costs, and this is what you need to prepare for. And I think, honestly, I can say we were pretty surprised at how many startup leaders and leaders of tech companies didn't realize that was true. Didn't realize it was a problem at all. And so that's a lot of the work in childcare. The other thing is there are childcare deserts in the Greater Toronto area, and so there was a report released by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in the spring. In the east end of Toronto, where the Workaround is, there's only enough spaces, licensed childcare spaces, for 28% of families. And so, like, forget about how much it costs. There's very little chance you can even get a spot. And there's many of these deserts all over the city. And so really important that we're just aware of how hard it is to get care.
Yeah. And the next thing is, so chest feeding is the term that we use, but being able to support parents who are still feeding in the workplace is obviously a big suggestion in this book, but it's also legally, companies are obligated to do this, though most startups don't. But we go over with a checklist what you actually have to have in order for the room to be legally viable as a pumping room for parents. So for instance, a door with a lock.
Not a washroom.
Not a washroom. Bookable room, so that, you're dealing with somebody's body. You don't want a parent in there feeding with, like, their coworkers knocking on the door trying to get in because they have some sort of sales call. Not glass doors. That's like an actual huge problem in Toronto because so many meeting rooms are just glass. So you have to provide a room that's appropriate for pumping, that's not a curtain taped with duct tape over a glass. And we talk about why that actually has to come from the manager and from the company. It shouldn't be the employee comes back to work and they're like, where's my room? It should be the kind of thing that you have ready for them. And certainly not a Post-it note on the door.
Which was my experience. And so when I returned from one of my mat leaves, it was the very first thing. I was like, where's the pumping room? Yeah. Where can I go? And it was, well, we think there's a room down the hall. And I said, well, what about a lock? And it was like, well, this isn't a long lease. We're not gonna put a lock in. That's silly. Just put a Post-it note on the door. But the note would fall. And so, I'd have people walking in, and I'm fully topless here, and I would say, well, what about the note? And it's because Post-it notes fall off the damn wall. And it was my problem to solve, right? And that's a challenge.
Yeah, so one of the things that we did in this book is we interviewed as many parents that would talk to us, and we included their quotes as access points for people who are reading to really get a feel for what it's like for parents. And we have some of the quotes in this presentation. There are obviously more of them in the book, but the ones about feeding, like every time I read them, they still give me the chills because some of them are shocking that individuals actually went through this kind of stuff.
Flexibility. And so this is where I start to get really excited when we talk about recruitment, because I think that, and we think this very strongly, supporting parents is a recruitment opportunity. If you look at the talent wars that are described in Toronto, if you build a program that's supportive for parents, you're actually leading the way. And so a lot of the things you can do to support parents are not expensive. Of course, we're going to say, subsidize childcare, please. But we also understand that that's really hard to do. There are other things that we can do as colleagues, even if we're not at the manager level, that provide flexibility to parent employees. Things like, instead of a 7 to 9 p.m. staff social, maybe we do a brunch bonanza. Or maybe we consider a parent-friendly event that doesn't have alcohol so that the pregnant or chest-feeding employees don't feel obligated to sort of like fake drink or pretend or make excuses about it. Why don't we just not have alcohol at one event? We can still have really awesome, fun drinks that aren't alcohol-related, so we don't other those employees. There's other things around flexibility and timing. Like if we're always scheduling a retro for 4:30 p.m., we're not acknowledging that we have to do daycare pickup at 5, and most daycares in the city charge $5 per minute in late fees. So if you set a meeting for 4:30, imagine the psychological stress on that employee who's sitting there watching, hoping that the leader can talk quickly enough so we can get home to our kids so that we don't have to spend more money on top of the already outrageous childcare prices just to pick our child up so we can go home and make dinner. Instead, maybe we could just set the meeting for 3 and avoid all of that. And so to us, we put a lot of tips in the playbook that were really easy to implement and totally free.
Yeah, and so another word on flexibility, it is the number one thing that employees want, both parents but also other people. But in the recent surveys with respect to age and gender, the ones who want flexibility the most are actually young men, and young men thinking about parenthood. So that's just something to let you sit with, because often what we get, or the probably the biggest pushback I get when I talk about this is a women's issue, which is not true. So just an FYI is that the expectation for flexibility actually mostly comes from men when it comes to parenthood.
And there's assumptions too that we make, when we make this on women, are assumptions around who's the primary caregiver at home. Assumptions around travel. And so, I've certainly experienced this of, not being invited or asked to go to a conference in the US because of course she doesn't want to go. She's got 2 young kids. It's like, yes, I do want to go to a hotel by myself, paid for by the company for 2 nights. Yes, please. And even if I can't make it work with my family, let me be the one to make that decision instead of self-selecting out our parents because we assume we're doing them a favor by taking them out of opportunities. And really it just comes down to mindset, right? When we support parents, when we create a pumping room, when we support flexibility, we create loyalty, which in the end is cheaper and more efficient for you as an employer, and also allows you to build this reputable organization where people talk. There's a whisper network, and it's just as strong with parents as it is in other whisper networks.
Yeah, so don't worry about writing any of it down. It's all in the book, but we're going to get into some of the quotes. Actually, this quote, this is from our the piece that we just wrote in the Globe last week, and
it's from us.
Yeah, we just thought it was such a great quote. We decided to quote ourselves.
It's true. We're like, which quote should we use? Let's use ours.
Let's use our own quote. Yeah. So again, we're trying to really break the myth that it's incredibly expensive and it's impossible to be parent friendly. We're too small for that. We're a startup. We don't have to worry about parents. La 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 la. So there's a ton of things that you can do that's outlined for you with pictures and checklists in the playbook that is essentially free. Obviously, we advocate for subsidizing some childcare. If you can't do that, there's still a ton of things that you can do. Again, to go back to flexibility, letting people work from home, letting people come back on a 3-day week kind of thing. Technology makes that so easy now. That doesn't cost you anything. There's a ton of examples like that in the playbook to kind of bust this conception that like childcare is out of reach for startups.
And I think what you said is so important around, it doesn't apply to me, this is a women's issue, or it doesn't apply to me, I'm not responsible for hiring, we have an HR department, this isn't me. You can be an ally. You can bring the playbook and say, I went to this great talk last night, and they have this playbook, and they have really cute drawings of polar bears in it, and the font is large, and it's quick and easy to get through, and you can just drop it on some tables for people. There's lots of ways to sort of advocate for parents and for children without having to wait for an HR issue to come up.
Yeah. So this is a quote that is from an actual parent in Toronto. I don't know if I should read it aloud or you should just give you a time to read it. But essentially it's talking about what Kim was sharing about, which is she came back from leave and she came back into a completely different situation, right? Because her boss was completely different. The team was completely different. No one really cared. No one onboarded her. Think about the stress that would have on someone when they're navigating now 2 identities, both being an employee and also being a mother. And there's no process for that. It's no question that this person left this company. Is it shocking to anyone here? Does it sound like a good experience? Yeah.
So this we went into, I've jumped on ranting about this because I advocate for childcare in so much of my life, but it's so true that I really think we don't have quite an understanding of what a financial burden childcare can be on families. And we need to look at all avenues for support, right? There are subsidies, but they're limited to your household income in the city. There is provincial support. It's in question right now in a lot of levels. There's federal support also in question. And so there's all different ways that we can look at accessing childcare. Yes, there's home care. Yes, there's families. Yes, there's lots of different ways to access childcare, but it doesn't really take away from the fact that it's expensive and timely and costly to employees who need to take time off. And if we look at this as a gender pay gap issue, the other thing is that we know for a fact that women are making 70 cents on a man's dollar. And so if you have a heterosexual family and you have 2 earners, who's most likely to be making more money? And if the woman is making the least amount of money, who's most likely to step out of the workforce because they can't afford childcare? So it means we continue to perpetuate all of the stereotypes of working because of all of these different factors that ultimately come down to we need to better support women and we need to better support parents.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add, which kind of goes back to our quote that was in this quote. Does anyone, what does millennial mean to you right now? Well, how old do you guys think millennials are? Shout it out. 35. Yeah, that's right. Anyone else? No? Yeah, so a few stats for you. The largest core of individuals working in the startup industry are millennials. Millennials, the biggest age gap of the largest cohort are 26 to 35. So they are aging into typically the child planning years. And out of that percentage of people, 80% of them decide to become parents. So thinking about parent-friendly policies as a recruitment tool is going to be huge for who you actually want to recruit. A lot of the time, the job descriptions that you see, you're looking for people with 3 to 5 years experience. Well, guess what? Those are millennials. And maybe they want to be parents. So if you're not, you can either essentially get ahead of it and have the policies in place, or you can resist it, and what you resist persists. and people will go to companies that have better policies. I mean, that's what happens. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you know, you hear these stories over and over again. I think when we were collecting surveys from parents in Toronto, we heard this over and over again. The number one request was flexibility, and then the other was like, do you have any idea how long the daycare wait lists are in Toronto? And just make sure you really know that. They're very long. My son is 2, and he still hasn't been accepted to a child care center. He comes to the workaround with me, or my mother watches him. We're still waiting for a list because we're in a childcare desert area. And so if you're not on the list, pretty much the minute you get a positive pregnancy test, you're probably behind, which is really hard to wrap your head around if you're working full time, right? And then now you also need to go out and do daycare tours and leave deposits also, by the way.
Yeah, and a few other things that we touch on the playbook. There's childcare on like a good day, which is just someone's watching your kid, and then there's emergency childcare when like something happens and you still have a meeting and your kid is sick and you have to do something, and that's why places like the Workaround are great. But there's a lot of different aspects to making sure your child is taken care of and making sure that your employees are supported when it comes to that decision. And then on top of the wait list, sometimes your child gets accepted before you're ready to go back to work. But you can't give up the spot, because then your kid will never get into daycare. So it means all of a sudden you have to go back to work sooner than you thought, and you have to pay for very expensive daycare, because otherwise they're not getting in. So it's just
I liken it very much to trying to get an apartment in the city. It's like you have to put first and last month's rent down. You can never miss a payment. You can't get winter or summer breaks off. So in my daughter's case, her preschool closed in December, in March break, and then in the summer, and we had to pay all the way through the year because you'd risk losing the spot otherwise. So you're literally paying people when nobody's there just to hold a spot. And this is a common reality. It's not a one-off.
No, it's very common. So the place that I previously worked at, Nudge.ai, I sat beside my coworker Scott, and this happened with both of his children in Toronto. It was like they just paid for extra months because they had to.
And we like to, you know, I think part of the reason why our designs in this in the playbook are lighthearted and friendly, because like we're trying to balance like driving home all of this really serious information and saying like, really listen to us, it's really severe, and then also like it's an opportunity to succeed and be a real thought leader in the tech community, especially as Toronto becomes more and more notable as a tech leader. We have an opportunity to really thrive here.
Yeah, and also what you were saying before about how often what happens is the primary, more often than not, it's the primary child care giver is a female, partly because of biology. And what happens is that career is the one that takes the hit. And when the industry isn't there to kind of support the return back to work, it means that women leave the industry. So if you look around and you don't see a lot of women executives, like there's a reason for that. And this is a really tangible way that we can help to change it. And so being here tonight is a really good example of you guys standing for the community and standing for your companies and standing for your employees, because it makes a difference in the way the community views parents, without a bias, with support, with understanding, with empathy, right?
One of the pieces that we both have done in lots of job interviews, and so Kim, you mentioned it in leaving the organization after you return from leave. That's the experience I've heard from almost all my friends who are parents, is that they return from leave and they're probably out of the organization within a year. And that's partly because of that return, that the feeling of what happens when you return, being treated like a human being, being honored, and for this major life transition you just went through. And one really simple, free, easy way to make everybody feel welcomed, include the pumping tour on your tour for everybody. Every single person who comes in the office, say, let me show you the pumping room. Don't make them be the one to ask, and don't make assumptions on who wants to see the pumping room. Just show everybody. That way it becomes memorized in your common language and how you give a tour. Be proud of it. Your most junior employees, when their friends come over for after work drinks, show the pumping room off because it's so awesome that you have it, and be proud of it. And it's free to do.
Yeah, and you should show it. This is a really great way to improve your hiring process just in general, is to let your candidates know about your policies when it comes to parenthood and also your pumping room. So a little about my experience. Again, I work as a software engineer in the industry, so I've done a lot of interviews of different startups. For a while, I did it just to see what was out there. I kind of wanted to know like what the experiences were like, and I would always ask. This was actually before I wrote the Expecting Playbook. It was one of the reasons I did it, was I would always ask because I knew that my skills were in demand enough that I could be loud about this kind of stuff and see what happens. And also I didn't have like the emotional burden of like expecting. So if these people told me, you know, we're gonna go in a different direction, which did happen with one company, because I guess they thought I was pregnant. If you tell the candidate right away, for someone like me, if I'm going to go to a company, like I'm going to look for somewhere where I'm going to be for a while, and yeah, maybe I'm going to think about having kids someday. So if you have those policies in place, I'm much more likely to envision myself staying there. And the other thing that, you know, people tell me about, here's our glasses policy, here's our gym policy. Like, you don't know if I work out. Why are you telling me about the gym policy? Why don't you tell me about the parental policy? It should just be standard for every person that you're interviewing. And you should have a pumping room.
And also get a pumping room.
Get a pumping room. TWG has a really good one, just FYI. So this is, this quote like still like gives me chills when I read it, because I just can envision this happening to someone. I mean, I know who it is, but yeah, I had weaned myself off of the daytime feeding, but was still nursing at night. My boss decided the project was going to run into the evening. I was leaking right through my beautiful silk shirt and jacket, so that was a pretty traumatic return to work. I think I got home at midnight my first day. So the backstory to this was that she actually went into the closet in the boardroom to see what was going on with her shirt, because that was when she was usually doing her nighttime feeding, and her boss had no concern for her as a individual or as a parent in that day. And I just sorry, it just makes me upset to read it, because I can't imagine what that must have been like.
So this is our main thesis of our talk, and what we'll close with. Supporting parents is the new recruiting, marketing, and sales opportunity. And so, you know, we see a lot of talks in the city, and they get pretty full. You know, sales opportunities, marketing, how do we hire, how do we find talent, how do we exceed? Guess what? Support parents, and you win. If you want to create talent who are hyper efficient and productive, and this is one thing that I am living proof of. I have 2 small children. I've worked in tech for 15 years. And after my son was born, he's 2. I was off for a year, so I've been back for a year and a bit. I wrote a 96,000-word book that was published by Canada's largest publisher. I launched an 8,000 square foot co-working space in our first 6 weeks. We have 113 members. I got 2 Globe and Mail op-eds and national media coverage, and on Wednesday, breakfast television was at my studio, and I did all of that after I had 2 children. I say that not to brag. I say it as your proof of concept that parents are by far more efficient than anyone on the planet, because we have to be. We can't scroll Facebook. We don't have time. One of the things that's so interesting to me about the workaround is we have 3 membership options: half day, full day, unlimited membership, like any other co-working space. Guess what's the most often purchased membership? No. Half days. You know why? Because they get in and they get out. So they got other things to do. But here's what I've been asking everyone is like, so are you gonna work tonight when you get home? Do you have to get back online? And they're saying no. They're getting the same amount of work done that I watched in all of the incubators in the city, and I've worked at most of them, and they're doing it in 4 hours because they have to. If that's not hyper-efficient productivity, I'm not sure what is.
Yeah. So the next thing that we have for you guys are just a few case studies of some situations that an employer might find themselves in when it comes to navigating parenthood with your employees. And this is open dialogue, so if you have an answer to one of our questions, please feel free to grab one of the mics or put your hand up and someone will give you a mic. If you have a question about what we say, feel free to engage with us. This is a conversation, so please participate.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
All right. Hypothetical question. We're looking for real answers from you. So we're going to change this to Julie, the developer. So your most senior developer, Julie, she's 6 months pregnant. There's a major iOS product release beginning in 1 month's time, and you'd like to promote someone to lead the project. Your most obvious options are Julie, who is the best candidate for the job, but likely is going to begin maternity leave midway through the project, or her more junior direct report, who can be mentored by Julie and stay on right through the launch. Who leads the iOS project? Oh, why? Tell us all about it. So you said both should lead it. We're going to send you a mic.
Yeah.
So you hire Julie into the role on a permanent basis, and you allow her to mentor Jude, I forget his name.
More junior person.
Right, for those 3 months. And then you create a wonderful development opportunity for that individual while she's on leave. And you can backfill her.
Interesting. So why does Julie not get the full-time role right away?
I said
She gets it,
full-time role. Yep.
but she mentors, so you do both.
She can get it. She does the first 3 months. She would return to that role when she comes back from leave. And on her leave, that individual can backfill her on a contract basis.
So they work together.
Yeah.
Cool. Anybody else have thoughts on this? Should we share what happened when we went to a tech leader conference that we won't name?
We asked the same question at a different conference with a much different audience, and their answer was, of course, junior person.
Unanimously.
End of discussion.
And like argued with us for a while about why there was no way Julie should get the job. Yeah.
Yeah, grab a mic so people can hear.
Julie sounds pretty senior. I would think it doesn't take her as much time as it takes our junior colleague to work on this project. But even if you assume the time is about equal, she still has the seniority to lead this project. So I think she should still lead the project. I would imagine, given her timeline, she would work pretty efficiently to get it done as well. But if not, I agree. There's a great development opportunity there.
Cool.
Yeah, and with these questions, there's no right answer. It's more just we want you to consider. That's a great answer, though.
Yeah.
But we just want you to consider the situation and consider the impact that it has on individuals. So in this other presentation we did, what we were trying to make clear was not anything about like nagging. It was more like, okay, if that is what you did, like, how do you think Julie would feel when she came back, right? And that's the thing that most people miss is what kind of impact are you leaving on your senior employee? Do you think that's a situation that she would like to come back to? And if she leaves after 3 months, how much is that costing you in terms of hiring someone else if she's your most senior person? Yeah. Any other thoughts on that
Or
situation
questions?
or questions?
Yeah.
I was also going to say both people, but obviously because Julie is the person who has the most experience and can not only probably lead the project to great success, but also train someone who will hopefully also rise to a level of success similar to hers. The other thing too is that, and I've had this happen to coworkers that I work with, you never know what's going to happen in the final months of your pregnancy. She could, have the child a month early, and, without that backfill, that's equally prepared because they got to work side by side with this super senior person who has been given the opportunity to mentor someone, that project could be worse off. So, but it's also good to have Julie feel like she's, done something really positive regardless of what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like mentoring, you often get more than you give. And really the point we're making here is to just get into communication with your employees and try to put yourself in their shoes when it comes to how that experience would be. That's so much of what the playbook is all of these quotes so that you can put yourself into the shoes of parents, especially if you aren't one, but even if you are, everyone's experience is different and there are a million different paths to parenthood. So creating empathy for everyone is a great way to build a really diverse and inclusive and supportive workplace in like a real and meaningful way.
Do the next one. Okay. Yeah.
I don't need a mic. Is that a real life case study of somebody that you know that's not named Julie, and then you ask the question to a group of people and 90% of them said, like, I know
take the junior.
It's like you said, like, this room is going to say Julie, of course, and mentoring, but that's not actually how things work. Or raise your hands if you think that your company would have reacted that same way. Mm-hmm. Or is that how you would have wanted them to react?
Yeah, that's a great question. Raise your hand if you think your company would have reacted.
Like, given the mentor opportunity to Julie and the other person.
Yeah, so what normally happens is what we ran into at our other presentation, which is bottom line. Of course, it's the junior person. We have to think about
too expensive.
It's too expensive. You have to think about the money and stuff like that.
And I think the risk of leaving
is high.
6 months, like you're almost done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen, right? Really?
I just for everyone else.
Yeah.
Like, I think that you're probably like 90% of people would react as the way that you expected them to.
Right, but that's why we have events like this and tools like this, is to change the conversation, because a lot of the time it's not that people are coming from a place of malice. It's just, I never thought of that. That's usually what it is. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a great answer. Didn't know I could do that kind of thing.
And we're not protected under this umbrella of like cost beyond everything. Like, we get it, we're startups, things are tight, but like if somebody could actually do a side by side on the cost of losing the employee versus retaining them, you would see you're burning money.
Yeah, it's always more expensive to hire a new employee.
Here's a good example we haven't talked about yet on school-age children. So only 4 months into the calendar year, Ria's used up all her paid vacation leave on sporadic days off. You know, as her colleague or as her boss, that she is a child in junior kindergarten. You suspect that she's used all her vacation days to stay home with her child through colds and flus, which happen when you go to school. Ria has requested to work from home occasionally, but your company has a strict in-office policy. So how do you manage Ria's request? Mike beside you.
You change the policy. We go through that every day. Like, you just, who has a in the office policy every day of the week, especially for things
Some
like that.
of the largest tech companies in Toronto.
Yeah, you quit and go somewhere else.
No,
my
really,
thing is
they
change the
don't.
policy.
Yeah.
You have to accommodate that.
I certainly love it, and I can tell you this case study is a real fact from a parent that we talked to, and has come up more often than not. And what I hear at other conferences, and I'm sure Anna's heard it too, is the new trend is to face. Forget the conference calls and forget the Zoom. Get everyone together, and it's like
So innovative. Talk to each other.
But work from home sometimes is so critical to a parent who's home because their kid is sick. Yeah.
Now, I'm going to interject here. I'm not sure. First of all, Are we officially in like a bit of a Q&A?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that if you do have a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand and ask. Now, I don't know if I was dreaming, and I'm going to say this, but did I read somewhere that some companies are actually sort of employees are sort of like donating days, basically saying, hey, you know what? I'm like 32, pretty healthy. I don't have a kid. You know, I'm not in a relationship. I'm gonna throw like a day or two of my vacation in this kind of pool that people can like pull from. Now, am I dreaming, and is that really happening? Mat leave. Oh, really? Okay. Apparently, it's from Matt and Pat leave. So, I mean, and again, I don't know if I'm dreaming this or I just made this up and solved the, the issues of the planet. But I guess maybe something like that might be feasible beyond just Pat and Matt leave.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic idea. And I think that if you have a team that's doing that for you, that's a team that's functioning well. That's a team that's, constituting itself as group, which is how you succeed. And whatever company's doing that, they're doing something right. So I think it's great. I think it's great that your immediate reaction was to change the policy. I wish more companies actually felt that way. The reality is that most don't, and most of them sort of create a bias and a stereotype to a parent who asks for that kind of accommodation when technology has made it so easy to be everywhere online all the time and to get your work done and to be in a meeting and to communicate and to do whatever you need to do. And I know from my perspective, like the work that I do, I get more done when I work from home because no one's talking to me. When I'm at the office, it's like, I'm having the coffee, I'm talking to my friends, you have a longer lunch because there's people there. When I'm at work, sometimes I don't get off the couch for 6 hours and I'm like, oh, it just goes by because you're zoned out and you're not interrupted and you can focus. So one of the reasons we brought this up is to just, again, change the conversation around what it means to be flexible for parents in the workplace and why it matters to a parent who has kids and has used all their vacation days and all their sick days for their kids. And usually what happens when you have 2 children is that one of them gets sick and then the other one gets sick. So you could use all of your vacation in 2 weeks if the daycares have a mutation of a flu, which is common too.
That's a question, yeah.
As you say, work from home policy or an in-person policy is just as harmful to non-parents as it is to parents because, as you mentioned, sometimes you have days where you're way more productive at home, but also I had this happen to me personally where I had a bit of a health thing, and so I was going to the doctor once a month at least, and what that meant for me is once a month I needed to work from home because wasn't at the doctor the whole day. I was there for an hour, but travel and back and forth, it was much more productive for me to stay home, do my 6 hours on the couch instead of trying to go to the office, go to the doctor's office, go home, go back and forth. And a lot of and I think if you're in a workplace where they have this kind of strict face-to-face policy, is you can really easily band together with the parents. It's not just the parents, it's the non-parents who also want to work from home sometimes and say, we need this to change because it doesn't work for any of us.
It's a great point too around caregiving in general, caregiving of yourself and caregiving of our elderly parents. So that's the next phase of this entire cohort is that we need to take care of our youngest and our oldest. And so we're all the boomers' children. And so the same appointments that you need to do for yourself, we might need to take our parents to. And so a work from home policy suddenly makes all of that so much more manageable and creates so much more of a loyal employee base, right? It's a great point.
We have a question over here.
So Henry, thanks for throwing that out. I always find things like that, if you work with people lovely enough to do that, that's amazing. But some employers I don't think also allow people to share days. And I think it doesn't necessarily solve the employer responsibility problem. But if you work with the best people in the world, that sounds awesome. But not everyone's that privileged, I worry about. That's something that concerns me.
And again, I don't know where I read this or if I was like dreaming it, but thanks for mentioning that, because to me it'd be like, hey, yeah, take a couple of my days, no big deal. I mean, like, because I have 50,000. But one thing I actually wanted to ask, and I know, I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but I do realize we have some expect mothers in the audience, and I want to know if they had sort of like their own sentiments or what they were thinking of or what they'd love to see in their future. And I'm not putting you on the spot, but I'm just saying, like, hey, this is the topic at hand. So I want to make sure that, if you had something to say or ask, you definitely were able to stay with that, Amy. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not putting you down like that. I did have a question now that I completely forgot. So the Parenting Playbook, you do mention the fact that, there is a startup culture and what they potentially think of. And we obviously have also, like, long in the tooth enterprise companies that have been around for a million years. Do you feel like there might be a book that might more apply to a startup culture and one that you might sort of craft for old school long in the tooth enterprise?
So all of the policies can be applicable to any company. We focused primarily on startups because that's where our expertise lie, and also because, like, with the Expecting Playbook too, like, it just didn't exist. Like, this, you have to understand, like, the conversation has begun in the last like 2.5 years. Before that, it was like, I was asking like this in interviews, and people would like laugh in my face because they're like, benefits are a perk. And when you look at companies like TD Bank or even law firms, they have amazing policies. It doesn't mean people use them. That's a different issue that someone else will run an event about. But they have great policies because they know that they have to, and they have great HR people because they know that they have to. But all of the tips and tricks that we use are applicable to banks, they're applicable to startups, they're applicable to CBC, they're applicable to schools. I sent this to a friend of mine that's a teacher at a private school, and she was like, oh my God, I didn't even have this here. Like, they're universal because they're just good policy.
And some of it is mindset shift too, right? Like, one of the things we talk about in the playbook is the new parent gift. So we see this a lot, right? People, either the employees rally together and throw in a pot of money to get a gift, or the employer might have a system where they just like send diapers or flowers. How amazing would it be if the employer or the employee team pooled together for like postpartum therapy, or like, sleep coach, or a naturopath for postpartum care? Like, I mean, those things are expensive, and in a startup, we don't have benefits to cover it. How amazing would those things be? We don't need a flower basket, and we can get diapers. We have lots of online delivery services to manage that part of it. But the gesture that would go from a new parent gift that says, I care about your whole self, would speak volumes, right? And any company can do that. I think the larger companies assume it's kind of taken care of and it's not their problem. So I think the onus is even on employees at larger companies. It's on you more to ask these questions.
And also, we did all the hard work for you, so it's literally all in one place. You just have to read it. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So I'm a parent of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. They both went to daycare for about 6 months at the same time. That ended in September because my oldest just started school, and I feel like both of us feel like we got a big raise at work.
Yeah,
so
you're rich.
That's fantastic. So my question around daycare cost, number one, do you know any companies that subsidize or have in-house daycare similar to, like, I guess, the co-working space? What's why is it not a more common perk, I guess, at work? Is it really expensive to, like, in my head, it seems to me that it's like you're hiring 1 or 2 early childhood educators, and you have a room that's up to code or something, and you should be able to do it, but
I mean, that's how I launched the workaround, is I was like, what do you mean nobody has this? And pretty much exactly what I did was hire a bunch of early childhood educators in a room and then put them to the side. I think it comes down to cost, right? Like, I've had really long, heated and not heated conversations with all my employers about supporting childcare, and I think in the end, there's this fear of if we have to apply that to everybody and we're planning to scale 10x, the childcare costs are going to far exceed salaries, and I get it. There are some programs. There's Helm, which is just received a grant to provide free childcare hours for female entrepreneurs. It's a great program. Kids and Company has a model that works pretty well. The model that a lot of tech startups use with Kids and Co is if the company has subscribed to be part of Kids and Company, the parents can skip the line. So you basically get guaranteed a spot, which is a pretty good perk, but the 100% of the costs are still on the parent. So it's not cheaper, but it at least gets you a spot. So that's one, and the cost to join Kids and Co as an employer is very minimal. That's one way. The other thing that I think employers could do that maybe bridges the gap is the emergency care. So yeah, you could buy a 6-pack of passes to MySpace. You also could just buy emergency care, date nights, babysitters. Helm is a good example of that. There's We Need a Date Night as a startup in the city. Like, there are options that can give families at least emergency care for the times when one kid is sick and the parent still needs to go to work. That could bridge it. The other thing I think would be amazing to see in business is to have more corporate business leaders advocate for the cost of childcare at the city, municipal, provincial level. Because I've done it, and I've stood there, and I'm telling you, I'm surrounded by the same 20 people from the same 20 nonprofit advocacy groups every time. And I stand there and I say, where's the Board of Trade? Where are the commerce organizations? Where are the recruiting and the HR? Where is business? Because we are influential and powerful, and why aren't we standing here and saying to our elected officials, this costs too much? And so, if we can't pay for it, we could work to bring the cost down.
Funny story on that. So when we had our first, I did the calculation that it's actually cheaper to get a second mortgage and have someone living in that, an early childhood educator living it for free. And
I was leading a marketing team before I joined the Workaround. I started the Workaround. If both my kids were in care, I would have been paying money to go to work. My entire salary plus.
It's actually deterrent because it's actually cheaper to stay home.
It's cheaper to stay home. I would have saved money.
It's cheaper, like, you don't think about the career opportunity cost, but it's actually cheaper for the wife to stay home.
It's financially cheaper to leave work.
Or the husband sometimes, but it depends.
Usually. Yep. If a woman makes 70 cents on a man's dollar, most likely the woman's going to stay home.
There was actually one couple that we talked to about that, and they did the calculation, and I think they were definitely in the red when she went back to work, but they made that decision as a couple that, like, we're still going to do this. And they were in the red, I think, for 3 years before they got out. And, like, now she's one of the most successful people that I know. But, not everybody can do that. And also not everybody has a very supportive partner who's willing to do that. There's a couple lessons in there for sure. But it's just something to think about in the sense that, like, what situation are you creating for leadership in tech if there's this huge barrier to who can get there?
To, in some of your interviews, anyone that might have, picked up and left and gone to a different city or a situation like that. And I say that as an example. So my brother, Silicon Valley, living it, it's, no real support around, the family is not close, so it's kind of like stretched. Whereas one of my best friends, both families, within like 30-minute drive, and they have like brothers and sisters who all have kids already, so it's like they can drop it off any time when they need it. So with that being said, did you, in your interviews, have you run into anyone who's like, we packed up and we moved to like Denmark?
It's usually the parents of the individuals that move to where they're working in order to take care of the child, like Amanda's parents and Ria's parents too. Yeah, that's what usually happens. But then again, you get into that like bookends for millennials where they both have childcare and they have elderly care. So in the question of childcare, like, we know that not all companies can afford it. Those are just the facts. But if you can't, there are still things you can do so that your employees feel psychologically safe to do their best work that doesn't cost you anything, that is just accommodating to them, like flexible policies, like allowing people to work from home, like doing a kindness of, you know, giving them extra sick days for their kids when their kids are sick or something like that. That's only going to make people work harder for you. No.
There's a mic.
I know you're excited.
Like just thinking back about the root cause of why our, and pardon my ignorance, but our childcare or kindergarten, whatever you call them, are they profitable? And if that's the case, you say that there's so much demand. Why isn't business stepping in to create more daycares that's going to drive the prices down?
This is a me question. Yeah, I've spent 4 years on that question, so it's a great one. I'll give you my frame on it, which is like there's a Starbucks in every corner. How is there not a daycare on every corner? There is some complexity to it. A licensed childcare license takes about a year. And so the cost to apply for a license is $15. So it's not a cost factor. A lot of it has to do with retrofitting existing spaces. A childcare center in the city is rated, this is minute details, but A1 coding is the most stringent rating a building can be. It means like full sprinkler, fire safety walls, 50 square feet of outdoor space per child. So when you start to talk about spaces in the city that have meet all the demands, the other thing in the license for the city is childcare can't be higher than the second floor of a building, which means we can't put childcare in condos on the top floor and all these big unused spaces. We have to put them at the ground level. We have to take storefronts, but we know that rent is increasingly going up in spaces. And so I don't have the answer. My observations are that these forces of pressure to get a license and the difficulty in getting a license has a lot of people walking away. The other thing is that subsidies in the city and in the province only qualify for nonprofit centers. So if you run a for-profit center like I do, my families don't qualify for a subsidy, even if they would qualify if I was a nonprofit center, which means I need to run it a nonprofit, which means I can't carry any capital. It means I need to be a charity, and then I need to go through all of the charity legislation as well. The third or fourth thing on that is infant care is a loss leader, full stop. Because the ratio is 1 teacher for every 2 kids. So if you have 15 children, you've got to have, 7, 8 staff to hire. Do some fast math on the profits. That's why childcare is as expensive as it is, and most of the time preschool and toddler classrooms subsidizes the cost of infant rooms. They lose money on infant. That was probably way more detail than you needed, but the point is it's not easy, and we're trying. It's part of why I opened the workaround was I just said enough. I'm going to try another way. And we're going to try to build a space where parents and children can be on site in the same location, and we're going to bypass those legislations because the act doesn't apply if parents are on site. So now we have some innovation to this, and we can build from it. And I tell you that willingly because I welcome competition. There's enough parents and spaces to go around. I welcome more people to open co-working and childcare spaces in the city.
Questions? Any more questions? Yep. I'll bring you over.
So I'm going to preface this by saying I am not a parent and I'm not planning on having kids, but I just want to make sure I'm clear with that up front. Taking a look online quickly, I'm seeing senior care, which we're also having a little bit of a conversation about, costing as much as daycare, right? We're talking, this is not just senior care going in on a daily basis. This is full-blown retirement center, place to sleep, place to live, 3 square meals a day, activities, outdoor, indoor, healthcare, all this stuff. That's costing the same amount as daycare is. Plus there's all this extra stuff hey, you need to be in there 2 years ahead of time. You need to be paying this much per month, even though your kid's not going there yet. To me, that sounds exploitative. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that really comes down to they're preying on parents' needs and wants to have their kids at specific locations, and they're cranking out money because of that. Now, again, somebody who's not having kids appreciates the fact that you're taking a look at something else and doing this in a different way, and I thank you for that. But like seeing that side of the industry and seeing why you want to change that, like something has to change. That's not hey, we need to go to the government and say, can we get subsidies for this childcare because it's currently costing us so much money? It should be, why is it actually costing us so much money? You're saying $1,400 on average. $1,700. Like a 500 square foot condo in this city is currently going for that. And that's not even an exaggeration. That's a shitty condo. Sorry. That's a really terrible condo, even at that price, to rent at that money, right? That's per child. That's exploitative.
Very well said.
Yeah, so I would echo, I'm sensing some inner rage that's forming. And
Hi,
I love
I'm
it because that's how certainly I felt, and I think we've talked to Anna about it and Nora, our partner in this many times, about just like, it can't be, right? Like, come on. I'm telling you, I called every childcare center I could get. I was like, this is an exaggeration. You're talking about private care. You're talking about some elite program. You're not talking about the center on the end of the street. There's no way. It is, and it's not exclusive to Toronto. You know, we're the most expensive in the country. Vancouver, Alberta has a crisis as well. Most of it is ratio driven because of the staff costs, right? And minimum wage and all of the factors that come into it and the cost of rent. Like there are costs in childcare. It's not a startup. And so we can't build in the same way. But I agree with you. It's really hard.
Sure, we'll go him first then.
I would like to get back to something specific that you said around the beginning of your presentation. You said that in Toronto East End, there is about like a 20% childcare availability at the moment. Did you mean in general, or like more like for the 12 to 18 month, or the 18 month to 24 month, or and so on?
Yeah, that was a report by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives that said there was only enough licensed childcare spaces for 28% of families east of Pape Avenue, and that's for licensed childcare for under 2 years old. So infant, preschool, toddler, or toddler preschool, those three age groups. And then it decreases once we go to over 2.5. That's usually when the costs go down. But for the most part, licensed childcare spaces, full stop. There's only enough for about a quarter of families.
It's exactly my situation, so that's why I was interested.
It's a fact, and I'm sorry.
So I have a comment, but just to support all of these comments, when I was pregnant with my first child, I got on a wait list at about 6 months pregnant. When she was a year old, I was still not on. I still didn't have a daycare spot. And so a nanny share program where I shared a nanny with someone else was actually cheaper for that first year than daycare.
For one-on-one care.
Which was insane. It was still extremely expensive. And then, we ended up getting into daycare. All but that being said, I think you touched on this briefly when you talked about dads, but I think one element that's really important in terms of supporting parents and supporting women in returning to the workplace is really a workplace examining what support that they're offering for dads to be able to leave early a couple days a week, or when they need to, for dads to be able to stay home and do sick days. My husband did it today with our youngest. Like, if you can lean in and help dads, you're actually going to be helping women. So I just think it's an interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few great dad leaders in the industry that are kind of trying to show people taking like that stand for all parents that are doing that. But there's also a ton of research in Quebec. They do it better than we do, where they actually force the secondary parent to take an explicit amount of time off when the primary parent receives the child or has a child or whatever, because the studies show that the primary parent actually goes back to work sooner when the secondary parent is there for the first 2 months, because it's a zone defense as opposed to a one-to-one. Right, so.
That's a good reference. I like it.
Where I work, it's the top up that they give people is only for a parent who gives birth, and they give nothing to any parent who doesn't give birth. So what's your experience with that in the general industry?
So you can you can do it so that the parent who gives birth takes a specific amount of time, and then the secondary parent takes another amount of time, and the government, you don't get more money, you get more money over a specific, or you get the same money over a specific time span. It does give the opportunity for both parents to be the solo primary giver. Most companies don't also top off the other parent, except for Amazon, which actually does full top up for secondary parents. So if I worked at Amazon and she was my partner, she would get top up from Amazon.
I have heard of some companies in the city where that's changing, where parents are starting to say, the dads in particular, or secondary partner, second caregiver, saying that they'd like the top up.
Or they ask for a salary increase.
That's right.
That's usually the easier one.
It actually, we've heard that story, that actually it is faster and easier for the secondary, if it's a man, to just ask for a raise.
Yeah.
And that equates your top up and more likely to get it than if a woman just asks for top up or a raise. Sad, but true.
But with back to men as parents, there's a few sort of there's a few really gold standard stories, and there's a few stories where, like, I know parents who went into the HR office and asked to take leave, we're going to have a baby in a couple weeks, like, I'm thinking about taking leave, and they're basically like, well, you may as well pack your desk up too, kind of thing. So there's still some really horrible stories out there that people are facing, like real life horror stories happening now. Like, we talk to the parents, like I said, the hair on my arm stands up sometimes.
It's worth saying, like, a little bit of how we put the playbook together. We met over the summer. Anna had done the Expecting Playbook, and Anna and Nora reached out and said, can you write some things about childcare, which you've seen I can do. I have a lot to say about childcare. But when we put out the call for surveys to parents, like, we pulled a ton of stories in, like, a month. We did in August.
Well, it took
August.
I started doing it at like 3 months out. It just took a while to get everything together.
And then when we pulled it all together, it was pretty quick. And I think it speaks volumes to, like, it wasn't that hard to get stories, good and bad. Yeah. But once we reached out and we said, like, share your stories, parents, they want to, because it's so driven to your family and your emotional self and your definition of self, your experience as a parent. And so good or bad, I think parents want to share it. And so, it would be awesome if there was a parenting playbook where we had a whole bunch of really amazing stories, and we didn't get these stories of very well-known tech companies in the city that many of us strive to work for, where the stories are awful.
Yeah, it's like some of them also wanted to be anonymous because they're still at the place where this is happening. So they don't feel comfortable, but they want to at least be heard enough that maybe someone will question what's going on at their workplace. There was one company where they listed their parenting, like their parental leave, under disabilities. It's like, come on. So that's just like to give you an idea of, like, the state of the union. And obviously there's some really fantastic companies out there. Do you have a question?
There's a mic coming to you.
I was just going to add to that comment that for my husband, next, since I'm going to be going on maternity leave soon, for him to take time off, he has to use his vacation and also his sick time. Right. So it's not even that, like, I feel like that time should be completely separate. It shouldn't be eaten into the parental leave.
Where does he work?
He works in a I would say an old boys club. One of the older, it's an old established company, and I think that, but the Canada office is new, so their policies haven't been really formed yet, and he's the first one to have to go on paternity leave or take some time off while I'm recovering. So
yeah, this book's for you, right? Just print it off and drop it around his office.
Oh, I've been highlighting.
Drop it at the holiday party. Like, here you go. Just drop it. I lost it. Go ahead. Thank you for sharing that.
why do you think it's so expensive? Because early childhood educators, I used to work at a college, and I used to be also really embarrassed that they weren't really upfront with students who were interested in this program about their salary projections. Those aren't stable jobs. They don't actually make a lot of money either. So where do you think all this money goes to? Because I don't see it necessarily benefiting the providers.
It's the ratio. I can tell you that. Like, I sit on the board of my daughter's preschool, and it's a nonprofit preschool, so I've seen all the numbers. They've been around for 37 years. I looked back just for fun. And it's ratios. Like, the cost, by far, like 90% of the costs go to staff. And it's expensive. The facilities, the rent, like I said, you have to have a facility that's rated for childcare, and that's not cheap. And you have to maintain it, and that's not cheap. I would say that's far and away the vast majority. Most of these centers are not, they're asking parents to bring in boxes of Kleenex, right? Like, they can't buy Kleenex, and we just shipped in like a whole Costco box from my daughter's school because they asked us to donate it. State of it is, it's most of it is staff. It's the fast answer. It's just the sum of all of them because of the ratios. And I hear you on the costs themselves. Like, we've advocated that it is so difficult that early childhood educators teach our youngest children, and the studies have shown like 80% of brain development happens before a child is 3 years old, and yet we pay early childhood educators minimum wage, and in some cases, some states, I've talked to early childhood educators where they're making $8 an hour. It's really hard.
No ECEs here, huh? And I wish I had thought of that, because I have a couple of friends who are ECEs, and they used to tell me, how nightmarish it was at times.
Tell them about her place.
I'm hiring.
Okay, there you go. Actually, I think one of them left the industry for sure, or went in a separate branch of it. But with that being said, I think we are going to, conclude the night. First of all, I want to thank Anna and Amanda for sharing this playbook with us, and an opportunity to sort of have this conversation. And this is, please, by all means. Yeah. And this is obviously a conversation that should not end here at Wrangle. Where can they get the playbook again?
Parentingplaybook.ca. So you can download it for free and print it out and leave it everywhere.
You mean there's no paywall?
Holiday party.
There's no paywall. No, it's free. It's
I'm
totally
just
free.
playing. I'm playing.
It's free.
It's a bad joke.
And I just want to intro really quickly and just say thank you to this audience for being so engaged in the conversation. And we've certainly given this talk to ears that are not really listening and on their phones. And so I just want to thank you for coming out, and thank you for participating, and thank you for listening and taking this convo back to your lives wherever you go after this. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's Monday night. We know you could have been 1,000 other places. So the fact that you're here with us is not something that we take lightly. So we really want to acknowledge you for that and say thank you.
And with that being said, we definitely do have some food left. Hopefully you'll be around to answer maybe a few more questions, potentially. And thanks again for coming out. And voila. Thank you.